Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Jeffery Olsen, and I would like to say his book, Knowing, is the best NDE book I ever read.
Thank you.
And I got the first copy when we were in Sedona at the thing you had. I don't remember what you guys called it.
Yeah, the human triumph.
Yes.
Human triumph. Oneness through human triumph. And I recall that well. And that was the first edition, like hot off the press. And I'm glad you enjoyed it, Peggy. I'm really glad.
Yeah, I read it all the way back home. So that was a road trip for us. We drove from Ohio there.
Wow, that was a long road trip.
Yeah, and there's a lot of snow coming home too. We seen semis on their side, and I just kept reading my book.
Yeah, it was February-ish, so it would have been very cold across the Midwest, and as you moved east, yes.
And beautiful in Sedona, people in the pool, and
yeah,
we had never been there before. That was a treat for us.
yeah. Well, at the time I lived not far from Sedona, and I'm now back in the Rocky Mountains of Utah. I live near Sundance, but I've been very lucky to live in some beautiful places, whether it was in the desert, down in Arizona, or in the Rocky Mountains of Utah. I've been very lucky that way.
I'm just so thrilled that you're on, and I'm sitting here with Jeffery Olsen. I'm like a groupie.
Don't be a groupie. Don't be a groupie. I'm a bit of a groupie of yours anyway, so it's all good.
Thank you. So would you like to start wherever you like?
Okay. Well, let's talk about the NDE. Let's go back there. And it's interesting. I mean, I can speak very freely about it now. It took a long time. I couldn't speak of it for almost a decade. So it's actually been 24 years since I had my NDE. And it was the result of a car accident. The entire family was in the car, and we were on a road trip. In fact, we'd been out seeing all the sites. We'd gone from northern Utah to southern Utah down into the Red Rock regions. And it was on the way home from that we had an accident. And it's still difficult to talk about sometimes, because it was me, my wife, our two sons. My oldest son at the time was 7. My youngest was just a toddler, just 14 months old. And there was reports of crosswinds. There was reports of a red pickup truck driving erratically on the interstate. But one of the most difficult things to talk about is I believe I may have dozed off at the wheel. Just for a second, just kind of nodded off, but then I overcorrected to the left and right and lost control of the car, and the car began to roll not off the road but down the road, propelled by the concrete at 75 miles an hour. And it was a horrific accident. The accident reports say that it probably rolled no less than 6 or 8 times. Now, I blacked out for most of that. But when the car came to a stop, I was completely conscious. And the first thing I heard was my 7-year-old in the seat behind me crying hysterically. But it was that cry, that a father knows, of thinking, wow, I've got to get to my son. He's okay. I've got to get to him. And that's when I realized that I could not move. I was pinned either to the floorboard or to the seat. I couldn't tell. There was the rancid smell of gasoline and all the broken glass. And I was unaware of my injuries in that moment. Now, I was in intense pain, and I was struggling to breathe, and I was holding on to maintain consciousness. But what had actually happened is both of my legs had been crushed. My left leg was eventually amputated above the knee. My back had been broken, at least the vertebrae were damaged. And luckily, it didn't damage the spinal column, so I still have full use of my limbs, although the left one is gone. But my right arm was nearly pulled off, and the seatbelt had cut through my midsection and ruptured all my insides. I had no idea. All I knew is that I heard my son crying. I wanted to get to him. But that's that was the awful moment when I realized that no one else was crying. And I became acutely aware that my wife, Tamra, was gone. She was killed instantly in the accident. And not to be graphic or morbid, but she was sound asleep. She had reclined her seat back, and so the seat belt did not restrain her properly. And she was killed instantly. And then Griffin, my youngest son, his car seat had broken apart. And at the time, he had actually come out of the car seat and had been ejected from the car. And you know, my feeling was, where's my son? Where's my little boy? And I knew in that moment that he was gone too. And you know, true enough, he was. Both my wife and my youngest son were killed instantly. My 7-year-old was banged up pretty good, but he, you know, he was okay. And I was in a horrific state, physically and mentally and emotionally. And I don't share all this to be graphic or you know, morbid, but that was the moment. That's what constituted the near-death experience. So I'm there pinned. I'm losing consciousness. I can't breathe. My youngest son is screaming hysterically. I know at that point that half the family's gone, and I begin to lose consciousness. I was able to eke out, and my son Spencer remembers this and talks about it. I called out to comfort him. And I remember doing this. I said, it's going to be okay. And in my heart, I thought, that's a lie. It's not okay. And it was in that darkest moment that light came. This is when the near-death experience began. And I suppose my soul left my body, because suddenly in that deepest, darkest moment, and I'm attempting to comfort my son and I can't even get to him, and I say, it's going to be okay, light came. And it came to me. It's as if light came and surrounded me and was comforting me in this darkest moment of my life. And it felt as if I was rising above the accident scene. And I was a little bit confused. I mean, I was a believer, but I had never experienced anything like this. In fact, it was so horrific. And I was thinking, how can I be okay? Suddenly I could breathe. There was no pain. And I was like, my thought was, how can I possibly be okay? And I seemed to be surrounded in this light that was so comforting and so loving, as if it was comforting me from all the trauma that had just taken place. Now, the interesting thing is, while I was in that light, Tamra, my wife, who I knew was deceased at the scene, suddenly she was there in that light with me. And she was gorgeous. I mean, there was no injuries. She was absolutely very much alive and beautiful and emphatic. She kept saying, Jeff, you can't come. You can't come. You've got to go back. And we had a conversation. We literally had the conversation about, look, you know, we got a little boy in the backseat of that car. And if you come with me, he's going to be orphaned. And I learned a lot about choice in that moment, because there I was looking at the woman I loved more than life. And yet I knew I had a little boy in that car that was going to be okay. And I made a choice. And I chose to come back. And that was interesting too. I have no concept of time in this bubble of light. I mean, I later learned that people arrived at the scene. You know, I had to be extricated from the car, and Spencer, my 7-year-old, yeah, he was banged up. He broke his arm and bruised his ribs, and you know, with my injuries, I had to be life flighted or airlifted to the nearest one trauma center. The nearest level 1 trauma center was in Salt Lake City. So, you know, I was unaware of any of that. All I knew is I had wrecked the car. I had said the most profound goodbye I'd ever say. And then I made the choice, the intention to return. And I actually found myself wandering about that level 1 trauma center, moving about the hospital, seeing the doctors and the patients and the families of the patients and the nurses. And that was a profound thing for me. That changed me forever, because as I saw each of them, and when I say that, I was really seeing them, like I was experiencing them. I was experiencing the essence of them. I knew their love, I knew their hate, I knew their motivations, I knew their fears, I knew everything about them as if they were me. I call it the oneness now. I was experiencing a oneness. And
Did you say you were a ghost at that point?
well, yeah. I mean, they didn't seem to be aware of me. So my spirit or my ghost or my essence was traveling through the hospital. And I finally did come upon, a man or a body laying there that I didn't feel anything from, which I thought was strange. And that's when I stepped forward and looked closer and realized, oh my goodness, that's me. Or it wasn't me. I was having this profound connected experience, but that was my body. That was the skin suit that I'd been living my life in. And I knew I was to get back in it. And again, that was interesting. That was just about intention. I didn't have to figure out, like, how do I get back in? It was about choice. I'm going back in, and then I was back in the body, but back to all the guilt, the grief, the trauma, the pain, the regret, all of it was so heavy. It was very difficult to be back in the body. And there's an
You had
interesting
physical and spiritual hell at once.
Oh yeah, it was. I mean, and the funny, and it's not funny. The odd thing is the physical stuff. I mean, I was aware of it, but it was nothing compared to the emotional grief of half the family's gone, and I was driving the car. And where's my 7-year-old son that survived, and what's happening? The grief was absolutely overwhelming. It felt like constant panic, and it was odd. There's an interesting side note to this too. And as I was airlifted or life flighted in, that the trauma team was there. I think there was 5 surgeons working on me, from orthopedic to my lungs had collapsed, so there was respiratory stuff going on. There was all kinds of things happening. But the attending ER physician, a man named Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll, both he and one of the trauma nurses experienced my wife, Tamara, in the ER room, in the operating room. And Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll speaks openly about this, which is interesting as a clinician. I mean, I have nothing to lose to tell my near-death experience. His professional reputation perhaps could be on the line by he's saying, gosh, I saw this woman who had passed in the accident. Her soul was in the operating room, but he says that he saw her, he encountered her. He said she was standing like above the gurney or the bed that they were working on me, and she communicated to him. And the interesting thing, when I asked him, and that's a whole story of how we were finally connected. We didn't know each other from Adam before the accident, but when I asked him, what did she say? What was she communicating? He said she was simply sharing her gratitude for everything we were doing to save your life. And I thought, well, of course that's what she would do. I mean, I knew he was telling the truth because he portrayed Tamara, who he had never met in life, so well. And
that's what she wanted. She wanted you back to raise
oh
your
yeah,
son.
she sent me back. I mean, she sent me back. I chose to come back. And yeah, when I can imagine this team working on my body to keep me alive. That's exactly what she would do. She'd be grateful that they were going to keep me alive, and they did. They did. Now, early on in the hospital, it was horrible. I mean, I was ventilated. I had a big tube down, doing the breathing from my lungs. My legs were obviously immobile. They'd had to amputate the left leg. My right arm was immobile because it had all been torn off. They eventually tied down my left hand because I kept grabbing at all the medical equipment. And I was in the hospital for over 5 months. I mean, I had 18 surgeries in total putting me together.
And you guys went from a beautiful, was it Easter Sunday day
Yeah. Yep. It
to
was Easter
that?
Sunday to
I
that.
mean,
Yeah. It was, it was contrast. It was the duality that life seems to offer so many of us, the beauty and the joy, and then the pain and the sorrow as well. But
well,
yeah.
I don't know if Spencer told you, but I approached him at the what'd you say you called it? At the Sedona thing?
Yeah, the oneness through human triumph is what we called it.
I approached him. I felt something moving me. In fact, I felt it before we left the house. And we really, honestly, we were having a hard time financially at that time. And I was like, I really want to go to that. And we really can't afford it. And I won the tickets. It was so weird because I didn't really know Robin Lansong, and I just happened to be flipping through my phone, and I seen, she says, Jeff just told me to give free tickets to somebody. So the first person, I'm like, it was like a minute. She had just posted it, and I'm like, me, and I got it, and I'm like, okay, we're going. We got free tickets. He's like, wow, how are we going to afford? I don't know, we're going. And then I started having second thoughts like the day before. I'm like, this is silly. I really can't afford, everything else. And I really want to go. But I'm like, okay, we're not going to go. And I felt something like I had to go speak to Spencer, like out of the blue. I'm not a medium. I'm not psychic or anything. And I told my husband, I said, I got to go. And I don't know why I said this for Spencer. And then you guys was outside doing this, I think, a sage thing and some things that I'm not really, I've never been around before. And I told my husband, I said, come on, walk inside. And I was feeling that lead feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this lead feeling, it kind of like leads you, and it's like this holding place. Now you wait. And I'm like, okay, I'm feeling this so strong. I don't know what's happening. Then all of a sudden, I got the knowing. And I was like, wait till everybody's gone. And it was just you and Spencer out there. And then you walked away. And I walked over to Spencer. And I can't remember my exact words, but it was something like, do you realize this isn't about your dad? This is about you. This is about your mom's love for you, that she defied the laws of nature to bring you back, to bring your dad back. That's your dad's doing this, but it's because your mom defied the laws of nature. And he looked at me, and I'm thinking, he's probably gonna think get this crazy lady away from me. He said, can I give you a hug? Is he there? Is he listening?
No, he's not.
Okay.
I was just,
Okay.
He's written a children's book about grief and death and his experience from a 7-year-old perspective. But he's an incredible man. I'm so glad you did that.
Yeah. Okay. He was looking the other way. I thought, is Spencer there? Is he saying, like, yeah, I remember that?
No,
Okay.
I still, we just did a presentation last night where he was with me, and I was just looking at the presentation that, that we had done. And anyway.
He said, can I hug you? And I hugged him, and I just felt, I don't know your wife. You know what I mean? I don't know her, but I felt something. And he said, what you just said to me, he says, I always knew it, but I forgot it. Thank you for reminding me. And it was just like, and I said, if I could build a statue right here in Sedona to your mother, and to say, this is a mother's love that defied the laws of nature to bring your dad back to be with you. I mean, I was just so moved by this. And I don't know, it's just a little silly thing, but I don't know. I felt like it meant a lot to him.
Yeah,
and when I got your book, I
all.
wanted him to autograph it. And he did. He autographed my book. It's signed by Spencer. He said
Good.
something really nice in it.
Well, he's an incredible young man, and yeah, gosh, he's he's married, and they're working, and they've got a little house, and I'm watching him, live his life. And it's interesting. I mean, when they moved into the little house, there was a lot of fixing up to do, and so I was up there, and we were moving things with them, and I had rented a little like cargo van to move some of their furniture and things in. And it's funny, Tamara, his mother, is very active, because they were all moving, and they were cleaning up the house and put things away. And I said, I'm going to take the rental van back. I'll save some money and get it back early. But I swear, as I was driving, she was there. she was there. I don't see her with my physical eyes all the time, but I felt her just like she was in the passenger seat as I drove that van back. And she communicated very clearly. And it was very moving to me because there was so much gratitude. And she said, you know what? He turned out really good. I tear up. She said he turned out really good, and it was like a nod. It was like a thank you. It was like, look, it was all worth it. He turned out really good.
He is a sweet young man.
He's an incredible young man, and I so appreciate you sharing that, because it's love. It's a mother's love. It's love. That's the most powerful force in the universe,
And I think, as for my NDE, as I was 25 years old, as in heaven, and I was told it was my time, and I was pleading to come back to raise my sons. And I just suddenly felt this, I was getting ready to go to Sedona, and I felt this connection. Like, I know what it's like to defy the laws of nature for your son.
Yeah.
To come back and like, I've got to take care of this. And in her way, the only way she could was to make sure you were back.
Yeah. Yeah. It was her time, but it obviously wasn't mine. And so my friends tease me and say, you got kicked out of heaven by your own wife. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I did. Yes, I did. But
my husband's laughing. He heard you.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. But I'm thrilled you shared that. And Spencer was my main concern, even in the hospital. And those were horrible months. I kept throwing pulmonary emboli, the blood clots that lodge in your lungs. I had horrible infections, and they wouldn't even let Spencer see me in the early months because my abdominal wounds had to be left open because of the infections and things that were going on. And when I was stabilized, they allowed him to come, and there was profound things in the hospital. I don't know that the door ever really closed, but I was so worried.
Do you want to tell the story where you saw your baby?
Yeah, that was at the end of my hospital stay. And it'll I can bring that right back to Spencer because it's so intertwined. It was profound. The hospital was difficult. There was so many things going on. I was in ICU. I'd get out to surgical recovery. I'd go back to ICU. But at the end of my hospital stay, and I think it's worth mentioning, after I was off of all the narcotics, I was literally just a week or so from returning home. And, they were teaching me how to attempt to dress myself because my left leg was cut off. My right leg was in a brace. My right arm was in a sling and a brace, and I only had one hand. And I was to, get in this electric wheelchair and drive it with my one hand. And I actually couldn't do it. I had to be lifted and put into the wheelchair. But it was that point I had a profound experience, another near-death or out-of-body experience, if you will. And it was interesting because they had finally stabilized my abdominal injuries. I still had a colostomy and all these things, but I could finally lay on my side. I could sleep on my side. And my brothers were giving me a bad time because I'd laid so long on the back of my head. I'd rubbed all the hair off the back of my head. But I fell into a sound sleep this night. And I remember thinking, almost as if I was conscious in my sleep, it's like, wow, I'm actually sleeping. I'm actually sleeping. And yet I'd grieved, so miserably during those months in the hospital and continued for years after. I still have my days that I'm grieving. But I fell into this profound sleep, and that light came again. I felt that same light like at the accident scene, and it seemed to be comforting me in my grief. And I felt as if I was rising above the hospital bed. And yet in this instance, the light dispensed, it dispersed, and I was in the most beautiful, glorious place. I mean, people say heaven, the other side, the spirit world. The only word I can come up with that is even close to what I felt is I was home. I was home, and it was so physical, even though, yes, I was a ghost. I was out of my body. It was so physical. I began to run. I had both legs and both feet, and I I began to run, and I could feel the energy of the ground beneath my feet, and I could feel the intelligence in my calves and thighs, and I was gleefully just thinking, I'm home and I'm whole, and I felt so much alive. And it was in that, that joy that I realized, wow, I'm not here to stay. It was a knowing. And there was this corridor off to my left, and I knew intuitively I'm to go this way, and I did. And as you mentioned, as I made my way down the corridor, at the end of it was a crib. Now, Griffin, my youngest, was only 14 months old at the accident. He had still been sleeping in a crib. And I raced to that crib, and there he was. And he was beautiful. He was sleeping. And I know you've got children. Have you ever picked up a sleeping child? There's a weight and a heat. And it was so real. It was so physical. I swept him up, and I could feel him. And he was solid, and I could feel his little, body breathing, and I could feel his breath on my neck. And I thought, it's him, and he's perfect, and he's okay. And I mean, what had happened in the accident, I began to just weep. In fact, I leaned over, and I smelled his hair. I mean, do you ever smell the hair of a loved one? And I'm like,
it actually creates bonding when you smell the baby's head. If something goes in the brain, it creates bonding.
Well, I smelled his hair. I'm like, it's him. And I was just weeping in such gratitude that I got to hold my little boy. And as I did that, there was this huge presence behind me, this giant, cosmic, overwhelming, powerful presence. And I became fearful. I mean, I thought, wow, that's God. And, I'd grown up believing that life was a test, and I was probably failing, and God was going to judge me. And the fear is, here I am holding my little boy. And the guilt, I'm like, he's here because I crashed the car. His life was cut so short because I lost control of the car. And this presence was coming closer and closer. And I had the thought, I hope there's some way I can be forgiven. And this felt physical too. As I had that thought, I felt those divine arms just wrap around and hold us both, hold me and my little boy. And then it's like the lid just came off. Like we became one. Suddenly my little boy and I and the divine, we all became divine. We all became that. And I began to see my life. I've later learned they call it a life review. And I was saying, well, that was a mistake. And this beautiful, glorious, divine being communicated, no, there's no mistakes. Your life is perfect. Even the choices, I'm like, yeah, but I did that, and I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway. And it was communicated to me, not even through words, but through this just being. That's your judgments of it, not ours. We love you. And here I was holding my son, and it was communicated, you are as precious and perfect and glorious and beloved and divine to us as the child you hold. And it was a very personal experience, but I knew on a cosmic level, wow, that's true of every single soul, every one of us. And it was so overwhelming, the unconditional love that I experienced. And I was given the opportunity to exercise my will. And that was interesting, because I'm like, I thought it was your will be done, and I was told your will is our will. That's how much we love you. And I was given the opportunity to hand my son over, to give him back, to let go and to trust. And then I woke up back in the hospital bed, back to the amputation and all the injuries and the grief. I mean, I thought, why did I hand him over? Why didn't I just hold on, But I did have a little different insight about choice and love and unconditional love. And I came back realizing that life is not a test. It's a gift, that every moment is a sacred, beautiful gift. And
you got to see both of them on the other side, something most people aren't given.
No, and I hesitated to share that for years too, because how many people lose loved ones and don't get that opportunity? Now, I've later learned we can always say goodbye or hello. I mean, write a letter, I mean, the veil or that chasm is not as wide and as thick as we think it is. They're right here. They're aware of us. They are watching over us. I've got two magnificent guardian angels. And yet I learned something keen too. And this is where Spencer comes back into it. I mean, it did come time for me to come home, and my brothers, his uncles had to lift me into the car, and we drove, and I was going to stay with my younger brother, and they were awesome. They had taken Spencer in those months I was in the hospital, and he was living with them, and they cleared out a room and put a hospital bed in it for me because I was going to continue to have home health care and, rehabilitation and everything else. But I was watching as we drove up into the driveway,
I'm glad you went there because I was going to ask you too. I love this part too.
But there's Spencer, he's looking out the window watching his uncles, my brothers lift me, his dad, into the wheelchair. And I'm thinking, how's he going to deal with this? How's he going to cope? I was the rough and tumble father. I'm now a crippled man with a colostomy bag and all the things that go with the injuries. And he's looking, and eventually he runs out as my brothers are putting me in the wheelchair, and he ran toward me, but he ran right past me. He went right past me. And I thought, oh, I knew this was just too much. And I began to navigate toward the ramp. My brothers had built a ramp so I could get in the house. And I ran up that way. And anyway, as I navigated and turned just to see where he was, I realized he'd run across the street, and he was knocking on all the neighbors' doors, and he was saying, come out, my dad has made it home. Come see my dad. And I burst into tears. I
think I cried at that part in the book.
And, he eventually did come. He threw himself on my lap, which just about killed me because I still had all the sutures from the abdominal repair and all that had gone on. But the reason I share that is he threw his arms around me, and I had a huge realization. I mean, there I was in a wheelchair holding my surviving son in this realm. And that was no less divine than being in the other realms holding my son that had passed. I mean, suddenly heaven was right here. There was nowhere to go. There was nothing to become. It was simply to be in that divine, profound moment and experience the unconditional love of a child, which was every bit as powerful as the unconditional love of the divine creator. I mean, it's like suddenly it was all right here if I chose to experience it and be open to that. And Spencer's he was an incredible kid, and he had his, he never had an experience. He never had a near-death experience or anything happen. And, here I am talking about, gosh, I saw Mom. I said goodbye to Griffin, and he kind of said, Dad, I got nothing. I was a little boy. I begged God for years just to feel my mom once. I got nothing.
That's why I told him. I said, this is all about you. Your mom defied the laws of nature, to make sure your dad lived to take care of you. Your mom loved you that much.
Yeah. Oh, he's become such an incredible man. I mean, he never has had this, that, and I think many people don't, they don't have the out of body experience or some mystical, thing happen. But he said, you know what, Dad, I'm going to be God's love. I'll be God's light. I'll be God's hands. I'll put, he works with traumatized kids. And he's a musician. He's always been a musician, and he's a journeyman electrician as well. He does, so he's working with electrical current, he understands how that works, but he also understands the energy and the electrical current of love, and not in a cosmic, mystical, religious realm, but in the fact that, if I can just hug a strange woman at the conference and sign the book.
He did. He was so sweet. He just looked at me and he said, can I hug you? And I said, yes. And I just hugged him. And he said, I always knew it, but I forgot. Thank you for reminding me.
Well, he's an incredible young man. And I mean, he's a grown man now. And it's been an interesting story. And of course, it's all in knowing. That's the beautiful thing. That knowing's the compilation of the first two books, but it goes on to extended chapters and his wedding and beyond, and kind of the near-death experience is profound, but the life experience is so much more. That's what matters, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When the morning I decided to write my memoir, which I never thought I was going to publish it, it just all like everything just come to me. Like I was pushing all the spiritual stuff and all the bad stuff under the rug the same. And I realized I had to tell the tragic part like you did. We have to get through it. And I had to write the good because I felt people wouldn't appreciate the good and the spiritual things if they didn't know the hardship I went through. And I felt that way with your book. You had to really go through the guilt and the suffering and the bad memories to be able for the rest of the world to read that and see how beautiful God came through and allowed your wife to come through, and all the miracles that continue to go through in your life. And it's like we're not opened up to those until something happens.
Yeah. It's boy, this life is a gift. And that's what I've realized is the things that I judge as bad and the things I judge as good. I wouldn't know what was light or dark or bad or good or joyful or sorrowful unless I experienced all of it. And that's what was so clear in the arms of the Creator is, look, it's all a gift and we love you. Just go and live your life and enjoy every minute, and then tell us what you've learned.
See, I still carry guilt because my twins died in my NDE.
Yeah.
And I blame myself because when I was 20, my ex made me get my tubes tied. And then I was 25, I found out they could be reversed. And I was told every woman has 5% chance of tubal. This will give you another 5%. And I got that tubal pregnancy right off the bat. And It caused me to die. It caused my twins to die. And it was going to leave my sons motherless. And I didn't want one thing that happened to me growing up to happen to them. And I was told it wasn't my time. And I pitched a fit. I got to be raising my kids. And so when I, heard your story, even before I read your book, I'd heard it over and over and I couldn't stop listening.
Right.
And I would identify with Tamara, that struggle. While you're in heaven, that struggle, worrying about your kids. I identified with her so much in your story. Beautiful. And was praying one time and it's like, God, everybody wants to come back. And I was like pitching a fit, like, hell no, I'm not going to stay here. And why me? Why was I the one that didn't want to stay? And I mean, no, I knew why because of my boys and stuff, but still, all these NDE stories, like mine just didn't feel like an NDE, like, because, I was fighting to come back. And I was listening to you at a talk somewhere, and I continued listening to the questions afterwards. And it was like the second to last question somebody asked, I think. And I think a guy stood up and said something to the effect of like, well, if it's so great there, then why does everybody come back? Or, isn't there anybody that wants to come back? Why they all want to stay or something like that? And you said, the exception to the rule was young mothers, because they basically dig their heels in the clouds, so to speak. And I'm not quoting you, but this is the gist of it. And like, nobody else is going to raise my kids. And I'm like, that's it. And I jumped up and I was running through the living room telling my husband, that's it. I got my answer I've been praying for.
Yeah, well, and we all have such a unique path, a unique journey. And, I do feel that nobody goes before their time, even if it's a child. There's order in it somehow. And yet I look at death so much differently now. There is no death. I mean, we all live on. Like I say, I have these incredible guardian angels, but there's those days, when I think, wow, what have it been like? What would have Griffin been like? Would have it been like Spencer, or would he have been just 180 degrees opposite? I don't know, but I've experienced him. He's come to me in dreams and visions. Like I say, that veil, that divider's not that thick sometimes. And And yet he doesn't come as a toddler. Now he comes to me as a magnificent young man. And I've had that, I've had that honor, I suppose, as well as he's very connected to me even on the other side. And as the story plays out, I mean, it is tragic, but I must be the luckiest guy alive. I mean, I eventually fell in love again. I remarried, and Spencer he says, I have two moms. I got one up there and one here that takes care of me. And we
I
adopted.
saw her. She's absolutely beautiful.
Oh, she's gorgeous. She's a beautiful soul. She's as pretty on the inside as she is on the out. But we adopted two boys, and I don't call them my adopted boys. They're just my sons and our sons. But life has offered so much in the contrast to the tragedy. And I count myself as very lucky, very lucky.
And it's a story in itself, really, how you come to start speaking out when you went to a conference or you went to a group or something and somebody approached you about a book, or, I mean, it was just.
Yeah, I never had any intention. I mean, I had only shared my story with my close family members, my mom, my little brother, with Dr. O'Driscoll, which was interesting because he came to me, he and the nurse came when I was still in the hospital, and they were compelled. They said, we've been moved upon. I mean, he said, I would never do that, but they were moved upon to share with me what had happened. And I had not talked about my NDE or anything. I didn't want anybody to think I was crazy, but they were moved upon and came and shared. So it was only a handful of people that even knew what had happened to me. And I was teaching a little Sunday school class on a Sunday morning, and I didn't speak of the NDE. The topic was the love of God, and I couldn't even say it. I would start crying. And one of our neighbors, a woman in the class, came up and she said, something happened to you, didn't it? And I said, well, yeah, but I don't talk about it. But she talked me into speaking to someone who was associated with IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies, which I reluctantly did. And then he said, you've got to come speak to our group. And I said, no way, I'm not, because I'd just cry. I couldn't talk about it. And I did go speak to the group because he said, look, people are grieving, people are hurting. And this was years after the accident. There was a publisher in the audience that came up and said, you're going to write a book. And I said, no, I'm not. I barely got through the speech, let alone write a book about it. But it's funny what is offered when we're simply being, about life. And there was purpose in all of it. And I suppose I do what I did. I mean, when I wrote the book, I thought, well, my mom will buy a copy. I mean, I didn't think much of it, but it hit number 3 in the category in the first 10 days. And all of a sudden, then I was being invited all over the world, basically, to talk about it. So I was almost pushed onto the stage reluctantly. And I'm better now.
Jeff, you tell it so well. You're so humble. You're so kind. I mean, you just tell us so well. And like reading, knowing, I felt you all through it. Like, I just knew you so well. I knew your heart. I mean, every word, I know him. And when you would quote some of the things that you like heard in heaven or in these experiences, and it was so uncannily, I can't say the word, like things I have heard. And I was, this all happened apparently for a reason. Apparently my stuff happened for a reason. I mean, I suppose some people can go into that bitter or go turn to drugs or alcohol, or there's other ways you can turn. Right. But when you have something bad, once you're healed, you can help. And I can't imagine the number of people you have helped by sharing your heart the way you have.
Oh, you're so kind, Peggy. And I can get through it now without crying the whole time. At least I've gotten better at sharing it that way. But, if there's some purpose, if there's some good that can come out of it, then that's the reason I share. That's my purpose. And also the love I experienced. I mean, on the other side, there was so much unconditional love. I didn't experience any judgment. In fact, there was clarity, beauty, peace, joy, all of it. And I thought, wow, if I could come back and in some small way just be a manifestation of that love that I felt, then that's my purpose. That's the reason to share and to open up my mouth and talk about it a little bit.
Well, it was a highlight of my life when I got to Sedona in that hotel and you walked in. And I ran back and, I got a copy of my book and I think I gave to you. And, I just, I don't know. I was just starstruck with you because, I'm sitting here in Long Bottom, Ohio, Southeast Ohio. Nobody talks NDE. And so all I had was, the internet. And I started watching these and your story and you, just the way you tell it, really got me to come out of my shell and connect with more of the NDE world because, there's tragedy. And then there's something divine sometimes in our tragedies.
Yeah, no, it all comes around in the end, and yet the end can be a long way off. I grieved miserably for 10 years. I had even remarried, and I was still working through it. It didn't happen overnight. I don't want anyone to think that, gosh, I had this horrible accident and then I had an NDE and I was okay. No, I had a horrible accident. I had profound out of body or near death experiences, and then I grieved like anyone would, and found healing on a very rocky path that was to be walked before I was okay.
And when you talk about in your book knowing of meeting your wife now, you can just tell she's a strong woman. She's not going to be threatened by you grieving for your wife. You can just see how strong she is in that book.
Yeah, she's incredible. I remember when I realized, gosh, well, we were engaged. Like I had fallen in love. We were talking about marriage. We were, and I began to take pictures of Tamara down in the house, and I began to put all those things away. And Tanya, my current wife, this speaks to her character. She came over to the house and saw that I was putting that stuff away, and she said, "You're taking down the pictures." And I said, "Well, yeah. I want to honor you." And she said to me, "Don't you dare take all of them down." And she said, "That little boy, Spencer," she said, "that little boy deserves a picture of his mom in this house." And that, just that's her character. She was not threatened by that.
And I don't know why. I can still picture you talking about Tanya dipping her steak in ketchup. I don't know why that sticks in my head.
She still does it. She still does it. And it drives me crazy. I'm like, you're ruining that steak. You're overcooking it and put it in ketchup. I'm a medium rare guy and I like him just straight up, but she likes him on ketchup. But she's the hero of the story for sure. She's the one that's come in and just been light and allowed me to put pieces back together. And she and Spencer are very close, and our other boys. We're just we have all the ups and downs that any family does. We go through our challenges, and yet somehow we just stick together and make it work.
Yeah, my husband's my happy ending too. And we just
Good.
celebrated 24 years a couple weeks ago. Yeah,
beautiful.
He's my happy
Beautiful.
ending in my book.
Congratulations. Yeah, congratulations. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So I appreciate you so much taking time to come on my little tiny podcast.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's just good to catch up. And I said to Tanya, I said, "I know Pegi. Pegi was in Sedona." I said, "I know who she is." And so I was thrilled and honored to reconnect and to be a part of it. And just however I can support you, let me know. You've got a lot of light to share in this world, and you're doing it. That's a good thing. That's good news.
I met Jeff O'Driscoll there too in Sedona.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was tickled that I recognized him. He's like, he was just starting out, and I was like, "I know you. You're Jeff O'Driscoll." He's like, "I recognize." Yeah.
He's a good man. He's a good man. We've become dear friends. We've been friends. We met in the most horrific of circumstances, and we've become good friends. So
that's awesome. It's like you two go hand in hand, like Jeff.
Yeah,
Olsen,
we
Jeff
had no
Driscoll.
idea. Yeah, he was just he was the attending physician in the trauma center, but we found out we grew up not 100 miles away from each other, and both in little towns, and he was a cowboy and I used to be a cowboy. He was a bull rider, though. I rode bareback horses. We played football. We had a very similar upbringing. So who'd have ever thought,
Yeah, we're getting back into farming. We got like 4 cows and 9 sheep and uh, 5 pigs, and we got a bunch of ducks and turkeys, and we got
Oh,
bunnies.
you're
And
lucky. You're lucky. It's so funny. When I was young, I thought, I got to get off the farm. I got to get off the farm. I got to get off the farm. Now I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to get back onto the farm and that simple, near to the earth way of life. It's a beautiful way of being. You're lucky.
realize how cute goats are. We love our goats. They're adorable.
They're fun. They all have personalities. They really do. Even the cows, they have personalities.
I don't think any of them are going to go in the freezer. I mean, they're a family. We're going to go pour feeding them.
It gets that way. Yeah, they're a lot of work. It's a lot of work, that I know, but it's a good way of life.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And to everybody, I say hi.
All righty. Thank you. We'll see you soon.
All right.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye now.